just end at the end of the year. We want to carry on because obviously there's a hell of a lot of work to do to change our lives. So that's something we're looking to see how we can make that happen as well. So that's the project. So tonight's sessions are the Wellingborough Sustainability Workshops, which is part of our project. We have 11 sessions. We've had 2 already. This is the 3rd. And as you can see, we're covering a broad range of topics to help us all think about how we can change the way we're living and the way that we work together and the way we are in our communities. Lots of things we're trying to cover. The sessions take us, as I say, from a few weeks ago to the end of September. And they're really a chance to look a bit more in on some of the different aspects, to share our knowledge together, because, you know, neither Jonathan and I are experts on this, but we really want to learn alongside yourselves and with yourselves as well. Are there any questions before we start? No? Okay, let's kick off. So over to you, Jonathan, on tonight's session.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Jonathan, Marion's partner in crime, or partner on the project. And tonight we're talking about energy saving. This presentation starts off a bit like the Energy Basics one, and it's in the same format. So you may see a couple of slides that you may recognise to start off with, but there's plenty more slides that you won't do, of course. What we're doing here, we've all had a nasty shock. April, the bills all went up considerably. The price cap went up £693, and it's going to go possibly up again. Obviously, if you're worried about your bills, you're not alone. So the price cap went up by 54%. And people on direct debit are facing an annual rise of £693 on their bills. If you're on a prepayment meter, that's even more, it's £708, with the average price going from £1,309 to just over £2,000. Amazing amount of increase. And like I say, the bills are proposed to go up by that, or possibly even more again in October. So what can we do about it? Well, besides keeping the bills down by doing the obvious things like turning off lights, like myself and Greg Haynes had done at the start of this presentation, or running your appliances on eco mode, getting the most energy efficient things that you can, which is what the Energy Basics presentation was all about. There are lots of other things you can do to reduce the amount of energy that you're using that you may or may not have thought of. And the big thing you can do is make changes to where you live, make changes to the office or wherever you work. This presentation has a few examples of adaptations and changes that you can do that could save you money and lower your carbon footprint. And believe it or not, they're both the same thing. So what changes can you make? Well, I've tried to do this presentation with reference to people's houses. So the way I've done it is to look at what would you do if you needed to sell your house or rent it out. Well, the government have kind of helped us with that, which is nice of them. They've got something called an energy performance certificate, or an EPC. The good news is it pretty much does the work for you. It contains information about your property's energy use and typical energy costs, and it also gives you recommendations on how to reduce energy and obviously save money. Your EPC has 2 charts. I'm explaining all of this to you because I'm going to be referring to this throughout the presentation. So I thought we'd get this bit out over and done with. Then hopefully you can follow what I'm saying as we go through the presentation. The bands go from A to G, A being the best, G being the worst. In the charts, you can see what your current rating is and your potential rating. And it also gives you sort of what you can achieve with the recommended home improvements that they've suggested to you. So what does one look like? Well, there's one of them. Most people will be looking at their energy efficiency rating because that's the one that saves them money. As you can see, this house has got a current score, if you like, of 69 standard assessment procedure points. That's the standard that the government have set. It's their numbering system. They go 1 to 100. Points make prizes, essentially. So if you get between 92 and 100 points, you're an A-rated house. If you live, crikey, I don't know what you'd have to live in to get a G. You'd only get 1 to 20 points. And as you can see, these are nicely separated into bands. They look quite a bit like what you'd see on your fridge or your cooker, or even tellies, I think now have them on. So the government have done it like this, or should I say the EU have done it like this, and I believe the Brits have now stuck a Union Jack over the EU flag to just make it simple for you so that people can understand it. The real advantage of that is that when you're looking to buy or rent a house, you can compare different houses and you can work out sort of how much it's going to cost you potentially to have that house. But this has two charts, you may have noticed. It also has an environmental impact rating. So you can see the scores are pretty much the same, funnily enough. The difference in the scores is about the same as well, 1 or 2 points difference. So the EPC bands show you how much energy your property will use, as well as how much carbon it'll emit each year. So again, our house that we're looking at here is a 71. With their recommendations, it moves it up to 74. Now, their recommendations are fairly basic. We're going to look at some things that could move it up even more. So, but of course, first, you might have one of these. I know I haven't. My wife's actually training to do this, so I'm not saying that she's offering her services, because she's doing it for the housing association that she's working for. But what most people would do, and estate agents would do, is look at the government's EPC register to find an accredited energy assessor. It costs between £35 and £100. Obviously, if you're paying somebody to pay somebody else, it's going to be more than if you go and have a look for one yourself. Once they've done it, or if you wanted to look beforehand, you can look at other people's properties for their certificate on the EPC register. That's quite handy because some of your neighbours might have had it done already. Okay, the bad news is your efficiency probably isn't very good. According to the BBC, nearly 2/3 of homes fail to meet long-term energy efficiency targets. More than 12 million homes, and I must admit, Marion, that's the one thing I forgot to adjust in the presentation, is what a percentage of actual homes that is, fall below the C grade on the energy performance certificates. Obviously, like I say, they were graded A to C. So C's a bit like GCSEs, if you like. If you're of a certain age, a C means an O level. I would say that you don't really get a pass until you get a C.
Just on this, is there anybody in the audience that's got any idea of how many homes we have got in the UK? Greg Moore, do you know?
Yeah, the figure that's usually bandied about is 27 million.
So it's not far off half then.
That's right.
What was it? 13.5 million would be half. So
yeah,
about 40–45%.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Greg. Okay. The main reason for this is poor insulation. So again, there's this third thing again, but did you know only 1/3 of homes in the UK have updated their insulation? With energy prices soaring, It's probably the best bang for buck, the best investment you'll get for having an upgrade on your house is to upgrade your house's insulation. So guess what we're talking about first? Well, we're talking about why. We've all got cold houses in the winter, and sometimes we've got very hot houses in the summer. Only 7.5% of UK homes have insulation age of 2002 or younger. The reason why it's 2002 is because that's when the improved regulations came out. So most houses do not meet current regulations. In homes built before 1976, and I must admit, I'm going to hold my hand up, this is me, only 0.03% of homes have been updated with additional energy efficiency measures. I'm guessing that probably rules out double glazing, but you can imagine like loft insulation, wall insulation, all the things we're just about to talk about. So 92.5% fail to meet the current insulation regulations. Of course, why is it important to insulate your home? Well, it's better for you. It keeps you warmer. It's much better for your health. You're not going to get sort of fluctuations in temperature. It can prevent damp. Damp, of course, is not very good for you. It causes mold and mildew, can cause breathing issues and all sorts. Future heating changes. This is a big one because with new tech coming out like heat pumps, and we may talk about that later, you can be ready for anything if you've got a nicely insulated house. And of course, the big one for us on Wellingborough Climate Action Project is that it's better for the planet. Wasting less energy means your carbon emissions will drop. So the big message is stop wasting heat. You don't have to burn it, you don't have to pay for it if you like. So the place to start could be your loft. So if your loft of insulation is efficient, 25% of your home heat, or a quarter of it, goes out the roof. We'll have a quick look at that because that links in nicely with your EPC rating. It's one of the cheapest, if not the cheapest and easiest ways to improve your EPC rating. Going from no insulation or really poor insulation to the recommended amount of 270 millimeters, 27 centimeters, can improve your rating by 10 or 15 points. So imagine if you're on 50, you're now on 65 or 60, 65. Whilst even a top up of existing insulation can get you 2 to 5 points, depending on what it is, as an improvement in most cases. This presentation is called energy savings. So we may have a few slides that actually say what the savings are. Here's your first one. I've tried to keep it simple. I know we don't all live in a 3-bed semi-detached house, but that's what most of us live in according to data. So a typical 3-bed semi will cost you £530-ish for a professional installation. You could save £255 on your energy bill. So as you can see, in 2 years, you've pretty much paid for the professional installation, as well as 600 kilograms of carbon dioxide emissions each year by insulated and uninsulated loft with 270 millimeters of loft insulation, which is staggering. But you could even do it cheaper. You can do it yourself. So if you pop down to B&Q or other leading DIY shops, I'm sure they'll sell it to you cheaper, and it's easy peasy to put in. It comes in rolls or bats. Bats are long length of it that just slot between the floorboards. And has no damp or condensation problems. It's easy peasy to put in, like I just said. And like I say, in many cases, if you've got a relatively easy accessible loft, you could do it yourself. We've already said the recommended depth of mineral wall. The recommended depth is 270 millimeters. that's for mineral wool, but other materials need different depths. So as the world gets bigger and sort of lots of things are going everywhere, there's lots more options. So here are a few of them. Obviously, blanket insulation is the most common. It's normally glass wool. It has been for decades. It's currently made out of recycled bottles, so that's really green, better than putting them in a hole. And as I said, glass wool is really easy to put down and install and is really cost effective. And I'll apologise now for my photos. They've been added as per request of Marion. So that looks almost like one of Greg's pasties, but there we go. Not one of the Gregs we've got, I must say. And of course, there's more alternatives than glass wool. There's rock mineral wool, which is more solid than glass wool. So it's suitable for situations where it can be squashed, i.e. it's less squidgy. It comes in rolls and bats. It can come in varying thicknesses. It's also very good against fire, which is a big concern with a lot of the problems we've had recently in high rises. So it's resilient to heat and fire. So it's a really good material to use. Of course, there's more options too. There's lots of natural alternatives, and this is a bit of an odd one because it says wool is a new thing. Obviously, wool isn't new, but using it to insulate your loft is. It can be used just as the other stuff in roof beams, but commonly actually under floors and in solid walls. It's an excellent insulator, which is why you wear it as a jumper. It offers an alternative to synthetic fibres of insulation, and it can last over 50 years. And don't worry, you won't get bugs in it because they treat it against that, and they also treat it against fire. There's also lots of other natural fibres, natural ones you can put in. You can have hemp and cotton, just as natural as sheep's wool and just as effective. Hemp is also really cheap, very sustainable, and again you can get it in a roll or as a bat or a slab form. Wood and wood-based products like MDF, plywood. Wood's always been a really good insulator, so there's another option there if you wanted to use that. Believe it or not, recycled paper and plant cellulose. It's another wood-based product, but again, plant cellulose will do a great job insulating your home. It's equally as sustainable, coming from crop waste, and they do treat that as well. Let's move on, shall we? Because I'm sure we've seen the picture of the natural alternative. Something that was big probably 20 years ago, and I think it's coming back a bit, is liquid or sprayed foams. There we go. There's a person, can't tell if it's a lady or a gent, spraying it between roof battens in the roof, but it's equally as good under the floor or in between sort of internal walls, external walls. It's a good option for houses that have only got bricks on each side. So some of the houses that were built in the late 60s, 70s and very early 80s, you can't use a lot of, I don't know, traditional sort of insulation, if you like, and you may not want to put the cladding on that's obviously got a very bad name at the moment. This could be a good alternative for you. It's a bit more, well, it's up to twice as efficient as well because it's completely sealed. It will create an airtight seal. So if you've got a particularly drafty space, like an older house that has a lot of wind sort of flowing around, and it's not going to cause you any damp or issues, this could be the option for you as well.
Can I just ask a question on this one? Because I've seen this being referred to more and more often recently, and but I also saw an article recently on one of the rights programs about problems if it's not installed properly, particularly because it is airtight. Yeah. You know, is there I don't know if anybody from the group's able to tell us, is there any challenges perhaps with this around, you know, what's it, condensation or mold or whatever, because of things not being airtight. I think you've got your hand up, Val. Were you going to say something? You're muted.
Yeah, my husband's a structural engineer and he's muttering away in the background here. Do you want to speak, Rob?
Yeah, good evening, Rob Adaway, structural engineer. What the picture you're showing there is not necessarily recommended, because as you're suggesting, it's actually sealing the roof timbers against an airflow. An airflow is necessary in a roof to stop mould and rot occurring in the timbers. And in older properties, which I think you've also referred to, about this is used where there are solid walls particularly, over time, the roof timbers are beginning to rot and fail. So it's not a recommended, it's not been banned, but it's not a recommended solution for an insulation in the roof, in the loft.
Yeah, I've seen quite a few things of late where they're starting to talk about this as more of an option. And when it comes, and then next week we're going to talk about renewable heating options and in more depth about heat pumps. And one of the big requirements around heat pumps is to have really, really good insulation in the home. So, and that's always the challenge, isn't it? You want to have good insulation, but you've got to let the property still breathe, especially in older houses, of which many of us have older houses. So it's I think with all of this, it is about look at your options and do your own investigation to work out what's the right option for your home in your particular situation, and see if you can get some advice on that. But what we wanted to do tonight was to show you that there are a range of things, but with each of them is to do your own research.
I understand that. Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you.
Definitely.
Anybody else got anything they want to say about this option, or no? Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Jonathan.
The real boon for this is, of course, is that it can go anywhere. Obviously, if it's sort of going to affect the structural integrity of your house, then that's going to be an issue. But it's particularly useful for things where it needs to go around corners and set around things. So for hard to reach areas, this might be the right thing for you. As you said, Marion, there's a lot of bad press for this as well, but if done correctly, this can be up to twice as efficient as with a sealed I forgot what it's called now, a sealed sort of capsule thing, because it just traps a lot more heat. But obviously, like Marion said, and Val's husband, sorry, I've forgotten your name, you do have to be careful and do sort of use trusted people that will give you a guarantee on it, of course.
It's Rob.
Sorry, Val.
It's all right.
Okay, so if that's not your thing, then perhaps something like rigid boards would do. So again, made of various different stuff, comes in sheets, so it's really easy to fix, particularly good if you've got a new property. Obviously trying to get one of those through your loft might be an issue, but this will obviously give you the insulation properties, but also let a bit of air through as well, which is obviously invaluable. Because of the way it's made, with the reflective material on each side and the fact that it's a sealed unit, it's got a very high insulation value.
Just on this one, I know you might be going to say something about this, but we used a similar material, not the same, to insulate under our floorboards, and you know, because of the shape of it, it was quite straightforward to sort of cut out the shapes and sit it in. Yeah.
Well, believe it or not, when I was Googling for pictures last night, I came up with quite a few people who craft with this stuff. So you nearly had some nice sort of sculptures made out of this rather than just blocks on your screen. But I thought that wouldn't be the thing. Anywho, rigid foam, if you don't want it sprayed, you can get it in blocks. It's a great thing where weight is in need of support, like Marion's had possibly under her floor in lofts, as well as having rigidity and durability. Rigid foam can also be good if you've got noisy neighbours, for instance. So it's got excellent sound insulation, because it stops a lot of the sound coming through your walls, floors. So it's great in flats, if you like. So you can insulate between the two floors, for instance. And loose fill, as well as having liquid foam put in your cavity walls, you can have loose fill. And you can put this in your loft as well. It's made up of small particles that, just like foam, can conform to any space without disturbing structures. And the most commonly used materials for this are cellulose, fiberglass, and, believe it or not, our old friend mineral rock wool, which are all produced from recycled materials. Loose fill, as I said, will be typically installed in wall cavities, but you can also put it in lofts. Depends how often you use your lofts, I guess. We're talking about wall insulation. 25% of the heat goes through your roof. Another third goes through your walls. It's something that not a lot of people think of really when they're insulating their houses, but it's something that's becoming more and more of a popular thing to do because the prices are coming down. You may have noticed a lot of the housing associations locally in Northampton and Rushden in particular have been doing it to their properties. It just saves bills. People don't even really turn their heating on anymore because it cuts down sort of on the heat going out, but it also insulates against the heat coming in. So it could make your house an awful lot more comfortable. So if your house was built in the last...
Jonathan, sorry, we've got a hand up. Kevin, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, I'm interested in the the cost of all these. They're all kind of similar products, performing a similar function. With I think you've already indicated a range of prices, but all of this depends on the people who need this, probably living in worse homes, older homes, and ones which aren't so well insulated. It seems to depend on the money being available. And we had a lot of free installation offered over the past 10, 15, 20 years. So I'm just curious to know if that's still around, because if it's not, then the technology may be available, but people will be priced very quickly out of that opportunity.
I totally agree with you, Kevin, and we are going to cover that right at the end. So I might leave you sort of thinking that, because otherwise I'll spoil the last bit of the presentation, if you don't mind. But
no worries.
Yeah, there are considerable costs. I will try and go through some of the costs per sort of type of insulation that we go through, and then we'll have a look at sort of what help, if any, is available.
Thank you.
Okay, so if your house was built in the last 20 years, the likelihood is that your walls are already insulated. But if it's older, you need to check what walls you have. So solid walls have no gap. As a rule of thumb, solid walls are the ones that have a full brick and then half a brick and then a full brick and then half a brick. It's an older way of doing it. New houses haven't quite gone to that artistry, if you like. I used to live in a house with solid brick, half a brick, solid brick, quarter brick, just to confuse the life out of you. But new houses basically have the bricks the full way on, because obviously there's two layers to it and there's not enough room to sort of turn them round and be arty with it. Older houses like the one that I'm in has the alternating bricks. So if you've got a solid wall, they obviously can't be filled with cavity wall insulation. If you've got cavity walls made up of two layers, there's a small gap between them, and that's called a cavity. What can you do with solid walls? Well, they can be insulated either side. It will cost you more than insulating a standard cavity, but the savings on your heating bills will be much bigger. A typical installation based on our typical 3-bed semi-detached house for external wall insulation is around £14,000, and internal wall insulation is a little bit cheaper at £10,000. So it's a considerable amount. if you're having it on the outside, it's quite a unobtrusive process. Obviously, it makes the building a bit fatter, but they actually make it look almost identical to the house that you had before. So they'll have, like, sounds awful, but it really isn't, like fake bricks on the bottom and rendering up the top or rendering all the way across. So you'll have one layer of insulation and then typically a metal mesh, and then you'll have your render or fake bricks on the outside side.
Can I just say, obviously, you and I were talking about this the other day, and other people here might have something to share on this as well. I was talking to a neighbour the other day that's because I live in an old terraced housing suite, Victorian housing, and there's one guy at the end of our road that had his house insulated outside about 7 or 8 years ago with the process that you just described, Jonathan. And then, funnily enough, the people on the other side of the street, because I mean, why he was interested in it, because they both live at the end of the street, so their outside wall, the back one, is exposed, you know, the end wall. The gentleman that had it done first has had considerable improvements in sound and warmth in the home. But the neighbours across the street are about to have theirs done, and rather using sheeting, they're using this spray method, or they're using a company that's using this spray method. I don't know if it's the same as inside the roof, but I'm not sure about the price of that at the moment, but I'll keep you posted as I learn more about it. But so there are other ways, and I was watching DIY SOS a few weeks ago, and they were using a spray method as well. So I think this is it. Technology and processes are changing all the time. So it's worth people having a look round to see what the options are and see what the new costs are as well.
Definitely. Internal wall insulation is almost the same thing, but in reverse. But they do put a moisture retardant level between the wall and the insulation. So you've got a moisture retardant membrane, or whatever you want to call it, the insulation, and then some plasterboard, which you just finish off as you would the normal wall. So particularly useful if you're in a 1920s house like me, where potentially some of the plaster might be shot. Could be a cheaper and more efficient way of doing it. Okay, I've only done one of these, I promise, so hopefully you've all got big screens. But I keep on talking about my typical semi-detached house. That's the yellow one, by the way. As you can see by doing this, we're looking at a huge saving each year of £390 on your typical semi-detached 3-bed house. On a detached house, obviously there's more walls, it's going to cost you more money, but you can see that it's at least another third on top of that savings wise. Marion's mid-terraced, obviously she's only got a front wall and a back wall, so it's going to be a lot cheaper, and obviously the savings are different, and flats are a little bit less. Not quite sure about bungalows, depends. Let's say bungalows are such varied things, but these people's typical bungalow, 260. And as you can see, I've put this chart in, and I do apologize if you can't really see it, to show you that actually, just like the EPC charts, the carbon chart, the kilograms of carbon dioxide actually match it pretty much hand in hand. So for instance, our typical 3-bedroom semi-detached house is 910 kilograms saving a year, which is an enormous amount. As you can see, a detached house is 1,500 kilograms a year saving. So you're not only saving money by doing all of these things, and I will be talking more about saving money than I am talking about saving carbon, but just sort of keep this in your mind that actually money does actually mean carbon, which is why you've got the 2 EPC charts, because it's the same thing. Like I said before, saving money and saving energy is also saving your carbon footprint. It's the same thing. So if your property has solid walls, the EPC rating is going to be much lower than an equivalent cavity wall property. The good news is that the rating of the property can increase by 10 to 20 points or more by insulating externally or internally. So if maximising your EPC is your thing, i.e. you're trying to sell your house or rent it out, this could be the way to go. Let's look at cavity walls. Now, a big thing probably 30, 20 years ago, might be 2015, I don't know, was a lot of companies were doing, they'd given up with selling you double glazing, they'd come around to put a bit of squirt in your wall or whatever it was. These subsidies, as Kevin alluded to earlier, have pretty much dried up with that, so it's less popular. But the typical installation costs for cavity wall insulation, if you were unlucky to have missed that boat, depending on the size of your own, obviously vary quite a lot. But whether you live in a large detached house or a small flat, you should be able to make back the installation costs within 5 years or less, and probably even less now that the bills have gone up due to the energy bill savings that you'll make. So that's one of the best investments that you can make. So here we go. Here's our semi-detached house again. So this is cavity wall insulation. It's going to cost you in the region of £1,200. For this house, annual bill saving of £480, and obviously 670 kilograms of carbon dioxide, and it's going to give you 5 to 10 EPC rating points. So this house will have it done within 3 years. So a massive saving, and obviously, say for us that like to see a bit of return on our money, you've got the added bonus as well of reducing your carbon footprint as well. Some people may not have £1,200 or whatever it is laying about, but can still do things like stopping drafts is one of the cheapest and most effective ways to save energy and money. When drafts are uncontrolled, and I think we've all lived in houses like that, or I had a friend with a house very similar to Marion. It was like in the winter, you might as well have been sitting in a bus stop. It's too much air coming in, and obviously what cold air does is push hot air out. So to draft proof your home, you should block up unwanted gaps that let the cold air in and the warm air out. I'm going to give you some pointers on that later in the presentation. If there's anybody with their hand up, I must admit I can't see people's hands at the moment. So there are people out there that can help you with this, but simple things to do is putting some sealant around your windows. For instance, you may have had your windows in for a few years. Houses move, so there may be a window, maybe a bit of wind coming underneath the windows. You may have an open chimney. You can get something called a balloon to go up your chimney, which stops all the hot air going up your chimney. Other things you can do is fit those brush things over your letterboxes, a keyhole. Like, there's so many little things you can do that actually all add up and just make a massive difference for you. Even just getting a draft excluder, something that Judy, who is on the call, has promised to do, is to do us a workshop with making a snake. I think it was you, Judy, wasn't it? But so we may be having a drafts workshop coming up soon. Marion said this earlier, many oldie houses with timber floors, again like mine, have big drafts, and this can give you cold feet as well as high energy bills. Marion used those like rigid bits of foam or rigid sort of insulation. These can address both of these problems, and again give you a payback on your investment in 5 years or less, depending on whether you do it yourself or use a professional.
Just on that, Jonathan, obviously, as I think as Rob, as Rob said a little earlier, that just as it's important to let the roof and the woodwork in your roof, the joints in your roof breathe, it's as important to do that on a suspended floor in your home as well. So when insulating under the floorboards, it's really important to make sure that you're not blocking any of the air bricks that let the air come into underneath the floor as well. You know,
Absolutely.
I mean, our house is what, over 150 years old. The floorboards, some of them are, I don't know if they're 150 years old, but they're very old. You know, we had to do a lot of work to kind of flatten things out because the boards were very undulating. But you know, keeping those boards in a healthy condition is really important. So getting a balance between insulation and flow of air is something that people need to think about. You know, and blocking up air bricks is not a good thing to do.
But there is some good news there. Sort of one of the things I'm going to sort of tell you about later may give you honest, independent advice about that. So, like you say, the air bricks are there for a reason. We've got a house that's had various work done on it over the nearly 100 years it's been around, and there are some air bricks that are sort of filled up, if you like. But so yeah, I'll definitely be calling on their services, but I'll tell you about that in a bit. Okay, double glazing was big in the 80s. There was a program on, I think it was Sky or one of those channels, about people sort of selling you this white gold, I think they called it. But interestingly, at this time of year, 80% of the unwanted heat comes in through your windows. So imagine you're sitting in a conservatory with, it does get hot if it's in the sun. Same thing with your windows. Double glazed windows let less heat in. So it's a more controllable environment. So you could reduce your overall energy consumption by 24%, but it's cold, obviously, everybody thinks of that, but even in the summer by 18%. So it's all about sort of making your whole house efficient throughout the whole year. So here's some saving with glazing. Sorry, I couldn't sort of resist that rhyme. If you have single glazed windows, upgrading to A-rated double or triple glazed windows in our semi-detached gas heated property, you could save £145 a year and 335 kilograms of carbon dioxide. Plus, it will make several EPC points difference, and it's going to cost you around about £7,500. So again, some of the big boys will charge you more, but the windows were better. Something myself and Marion were talking about yesterday was, well, what about these triple glazed windows? Well, I did look into that. Depending on where they're from, like triple glazed windows are fantastic for keeping a lot more noise out. So if you're in a busy town centre, perfect. If you can get A-rated double glazed windows just as you can get A-rated triple glazed windows. So what I'm trying to say to you, probably quite clumsily, is look at the rating of the window rather than paying extra for triple glazed windows, because you may not see any benefit from having that extra glazing. Probably the cheapest thing you can do is give your hot water cylinder a jacket. Now, obviously not everybody's got one of them, but if you do, it's worth adding insulation to the tank and obviously to the pipes as well. It's very cheap and easy to do, and it will bump up your EPC ratings by a few points as well. By insulating an uninsulated hot water tank with the recommended 80 millimeters of insulation, you'll save between £75 and £85 a year, depending on your energy bills and house type. So depending on sort of what you use to heat it. A note as well is that just putting insulation on your pipes in particularly cold rooms, particularly external pipes or ones in your garage, is extremely cheap to do. You can get it for pennies, I say pennies, at your DIY shop, and it just clips over your pipe. So literally it takes you a few minutes and it will save you pounds over the course of a year. So you've done that, you've got a nice warm hot water tank, but you've still got a really old boiler. So upgrading your heating system, or the heating system itself, is one of the key factors in the EPC. If you have an old boiler, upgrading it to a new condensing model will improve your rating by 5 to even 20 points, depending on the age of your current system. So I know one of my neighbours did it a few years ago. They got rid of their old back boiler, which looked like it was something that was going to sort of, I don't know, well, it looked industrial, let's put it that way. And their new boiler just cost them an awful lot less money to use, but obviously it uses a lot less energy. So heating and hot water accounts for half of what you spend in a year. It's obviously what your gas bill's all about if you've got gas, and why your gas bill is quite often more expensive than your electricity bill. All modern, well-maintained boilers burn their fuel efficiently, but inevitably, some of that heat just goes up the chimney or escapes through the flue. Modern boilers are more efficient for several reasons, but their main advantage is that they're condensing. And what does condensing mean? It recovers the heat from the exhaust flue and uses it to heat the central heating, making it more efficient than old boilers. We've just had one fitted. We didn't have a perfectly good boiler. We had to have it fixed every couple of months, which meant a few cold showers for me. But our new one, as we've just said, like I say, reuses so much more of the heat, and saves us money on our gas bills. And with it sort of potentially doubling this year, it's a massive thing to consider. Replacement costs, obviously they're going to vary, but a straightforward gas boiler replacement with thermostatic radiator valves, which are the ones that basically turn themselves off when it gets too hot, will typically cost about £4,000. Oil boilers are about £4,700. Again, with your thermostatic radiator valves.
Jonathan, we've got a question.
Go
Kevin?
for it.
Hello, sorry, it's more of a comment really, because I had a condenser boiler stuck into the house 10 years ago, I suppose it was. But I realised that I'd made a mistake, because I'd been helpful to the guy who's fitting it. I just took the most convenient room with the most convenient wall and said, yeah, stick it in there, that'll be fine. So had I worked out what was going on there, I'd have had it the most inconvenient room, furthest away from the outdoors, because the outlet pipe constantly, despite the recovery of heat, constantly is warmer than the environment. So the outlet pipe, if it were to run the length of the house, would actually be emitting that heat into the room before it left the house. So just a thought that you don't want to have your boiler right next to an outdoor wall if you can avoid it, or if you do, have it run the outlet to the other side of the house.
I'm not sure that's probably recommended, Kevin, because they've got to be, I think they're put near a wall for a reason, so the gas can get out fairly easily, if you know what I mean. It might be worth checking that before sort of we say that's the way to
Absolutely,
go.
I wouldn't take that as advice over and above the advice of an engineer. But if you can haggle with your engineer and he will approve it to be in a more indoor spot, then that would be the thought. And it was just a small regret I had. But you're right, I'm no engineer.
No, I'm not saying that. The other thing to say to you is that boilers 10 years ago were a lot less efficient than they are sort of now. Like, things have gone on leaps and bounds. So potentially one that was fitted last year would probably not have the same heat on its flue that possibly yours does. And it begs the question, how much of the heat is it actually recovering if it's that warm? So just a thought.
Absolutely, and it might be a time to start thinking of replacing it and looking at the best technology.
I think there are quite stringent standards about where boilers are fitted in the home, particularly that they need to be on an outside wall. and where the vent actually goes. So the building standards on that has enhanced quite a lot in the last few years.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the thing
Oh,
is that you're thinking about other options, and maybe things like underfloor heating option might be a better, might be more what you're actually wanting to achieve than trying to get that indirectly from the gas boiler, if you see what I mean.
Yeah,
anyway.
definitely. Anyway, yeah. And obviously, if the gases cool down too much, they may not be going out as efficiently as they probably are now. But again, like I say, myself and Marion aren't the complete experts on this. But energy savings. Here we go. There's another one of these energy saving slides. You could save up to £380 per year on your full fuel bill in a gas heated, here we go, semi-detached home, when replacing an old gas boiler with a new A-rated condensing boiler. Be interesting, Kevin, to know what rating your boiler has now. With a programmer, room thermostat, and thermostatic radiator controls. So again, it's another huge lump off your fuel bill. But obviously, and this is again sort of aimed at you, Kevin, as much as everybody else, is what's next. It may be time to change your boiler, but if you're thinking ahead for when it needs to be replaced, you'll need to decide what type of heating system is right for you. Now might not be the right time to switch to another gas boiler, because obviously new technology is coming on leap and bounds. So it might be the right time to switch to a low carbon or zero carbon heating system.
And just on that, are you going to say this in your next slide, Jonathan?
Almost guaranteed, Marion.
Go on,
Should
then.
we go to the next slide and you can tell me if it's not there? No, but it's probably on the next one. I'll do the next two slides and then you can come in. So what most heating engineers are saying now is that electricity is the future of heating. So gas will become a thing of the past. And electricity is good because it's becoming increasingly low carbon as more renewable resources like wind farms, solar panels are being connected to the grid. So replacing gas and coal power stations with your renewables obviously takes a lot of carbon out of the atmosphere. This makes a heat pump an extremely low carbon heating option, and increasingly so as electricity. Sorry, I'll get my words out in a minute. As our electricity grid further decarbonises. And heat pumps. What's a heat pump? Heat pump's a bit like a backwards fridge, or if you like, a backwards air conditioning unit. They work on almost the same sort of principle, that it removes one type of heat or cold from one location extremely efficiently, like a really good fridge does in reverse, if you like, and puts it somewhere else. It will take the heat out of the atmosphere outside and move it into your house. It uses electricity to do this, but the heat delivered into your home is much more than the electricity used to power the system. But traditionally, heating with electric has always been seen as the most expensive way, till they started bringing out storage heaters, but obviously that wasn't always needed. But this way, just like your fridge, you're converting a small bit of energy into a large piece of energy by using new technology. Did that answer your question, Marion?
No, it's not what I was going to say, really.
What were you going to say?
Going back to the gas boilers, obviously the government is requiring gas and oil boilers, basically from the end of this decade as it stands at the moment, that from the end of the decade, they won't be produced anymore. So, looking at other ways of heating our homes is really important. Now, you could argue that we're far enough out from 2030 for people to buy maybe the most efficient gas central heating system, or boiler rather. But clearly one of the motivations for this whole project is to help people explore other options. If we're going to I mean, it's something that in our house we need to think about is a new heating option. Is it buy a new gas boiler whilst they're still available, or is it can we find a renewable option?
It's a very good point, because actually new build properties from 2025, which is only 2.5 years ago away, won't be able to install new gas boilers. They'll all be expected to install systems like heat pumps or electric heating systems.
Yeah.
So as we move forward, these things will just become obsolete, obviously. But like I say, you've got to go with what's works for your house. And one of the things that one of the issues with heat pumps is, if you've got an old drafty house, like sounds like Marion and definitely myself have got, then addressing the insulation issues is going to give you a much greater sort of saving, if you like, than installing a new sort of more environmentally friendly heating system to start off with. Obviously, once you've got the nice insulated house, then jump on board with heat pumps. There we go. So renewables is the subject of our next presentation. So I won't go into this too much, but let's touch on it because it does give you big savings, and this presentation is all about energy savings. So renewable energy is generated from natural resources such as sunlight, wind, rain, tides and geothermal heat. All renewables, wind turbines generate the most electricity, but unless you've got a farm, basically, you're not going to be able to put a big enough one in or on your property to make that much of a difference, particularly when you're talking about your EPC rating. So possibly the best thing to do is solar panels. Here's a 3-bed semi-detached house again, possibly. By adding a 16-panel 4 kilowatts solar system, you could produce around 2,850 kilowatt hours of electricity in a year. Plus, you could add 10 points to your EPC rating. Now, myself and Marion were talking about these slides yesterday. It turns out that Marion only does about 2,850 kilowatt hours a year. So obviously, if it's replacing the heating as well, that would change. But somebody who's preparing a presentation for next week is basically going to tell us that what he produces more than makes up for what he uses in a year. So I won't spoil that too much, but I'm looking forward to seeing his report from what he's been doing over the last few years. Solar thermal was a big thing before solar PV, solar photovoltaics, came out. My mum's got one. It's on her roof. It supplies all of her hot water and also a little bit for the radiators too. So it fills her little tank up quite nicely, keeps it hot for the whole day, and obviously doesn't cost her a penny. She's had it up there for now 15 years, so it's still going and still as good as it was. So a good alternative, and it will take up less roof space than your PV system, and it will cut your heating bill and your hot water bills, but obviously isn't going to sort of make that much of a difference, a few points on your EPC rating, because it's not quite so much of a difference.
So just on what we were discussing the other day, Jonathan.
Yeah.
So if we had, well, I don't think we've got a big enough roof to have 16 panels on it, but in that typical 3-bed semi that you talked about, if you're generating that much power for us, I mean, that I think that amount of energy, those amount of kilowatt hours is just slightly less than our full year's electric bill. But obviously, as you were saying the other day, even if our roof was big enough to generate that kind of level of power from solar panels, obviously it's generating it throughout the day, and we're not necessarily using it all at the time that it's generated. So even though it's a similar amount of power, we might not be getting if we had solar panels, we might might not be getting full value of that solar generated energy.
It's
and
an
using it
interesting one. It's
ourselves.
something that Simon's going to go into quite a lot next week. He's going to share like a presentation with you to sort of go through, Marion. That his equivalent of what he uses goes into the national grid, and he describes it a bit like his own personal battery. He sort of pumps all this power in during the day when he's off at work, and then reclaims it at night. And he's on a clever system where he doesn't pay as much at night as he does during the day. So he's kind of quids in, but obviously there are other sort of ways of doing that. We're going to talk a bit more about that next week. One of the issues with solar panels is what happens if your house is pointed in the wrong direction, for instance, or again, in my personal experience, if you've got, I think they're called hips on your house, where your roof is kind of pointing in like in 3 directions, unfortunately in the wrong direction for me, and you can't fit enough solar panels on there to make it financially viable. I mean, there are issues, but essentially in an ideal situation, and this figure is based on, again, on a 3-bedroom semi, but in Yorkshire, so I think, bearing in mind they're not famed for their sunshine, if they can do this in Yorkshire, we should be all right. Perhaps a little bit sunnier southwards, if you like. So this is just a general rating. Like I said, I didn't want to sort of overly egg it too much because that will spoil next week's presentation. So energy in demand. It's funnily enough, it's actually a website, Energy in Demand. It's all about sort of coping with energy in the future. And it's a good point because as the world population rises, so does the demand for energy. And it's not just the population rises. As we've seen in China over the last 20 years, they've gone from not using hardly any energy per capita to demanding a lot more energy. And they're sort of one of the biggest polluters now, probably because they make most of the stuff. But so as energy becomes more in demand for our homes, businesses and communities, innovation and expansion of renewable energy sources is key to maintaining a sustainable level of energy and to protect our planet from climate change. One thing somebody said, one thing you may notice is generally when it's not sunny, it's windy, and when it's not windy, it's sunny. So, I mean, a nice mix. Obviously, there is the issue with baseload, but that can obviously be overcome. And again, I won't spoil it for next week. So, get smarter. Got a nice little light bulb there to sort of go, ding, here's an idea. One of the most important things about saving energy is to know what you're using. So, if you get a bit smarter with that and get yourself a smart meter, it will tell you what you're using and what you're wasting. It'll also give you the opportunity to set goals of saving. So for instance, you might look at the little box that's sat on the side and go, why am I using all that electricity a day? And you can work out what uses electricity and how to reduce your energy bills. It's also going to help future-proof everything. So it's going to help create a smart grid, which is particularly important when you're talking about renewable energy, a grid that will sort of turn on and off to charge things like electric cars, because an electric car doesn't take all night to charge, but it might be from say 2 till 5 in the morning. There's lots of energy out there, but nobody using it, so it can switch the cars on for that time there, for instance. But also it helps us all collectively save energy because the people that are providing the energy can see what the demand is like. This is a controversial one with me and Marion, but I've left it in there, so I expect an earful later. So here we go. When you know what you're using, you then need to make sure you're getting a good deal from your gas and electricity supplier. Whether you are considering switching with them or staying. Most people will have had the same electricity and gas suppliers forever. They may have changed their name a few times, but essentially they're still Eastern Electricity or East Midlands Electricity as it is here, and British Gas. the way that works is that these people aren't necessarily on the best deals. They're on the standard tariffs, and their suppliers might have cheaper tariffs, but obviously, unless they're asked about them, they don't necessarily suggest you saving money. So it's worth sort of getting in contact or doing some research to see if you can save some money with your supplier, or possibly switch. It may not be the best time at the moment to switch, because a lot of companies, including the one that I'm with, has gone bust and has put up the electricity bills an awful lot, and the gas bills, because obviously the price cap went out. So this says you could save £300 a year by switching or just calling for a better deal. It could be more, it could be less, and of course at the moment the markets are so very volatile, but it is still worth looking. And I'm amazed that Marion hasn't said anything there. Something I alluded to earlier was, where do you get the advice from for saving energy? Well, there's actually something called Northamptonshire Energy Saving Service, or NES, and they offer a free and independent assessment of your home, followed by practical measures to improve your energy and efficiency and to reduce your costs. These things are like blocking drafts up, doing the very simple things that aren't necessarily going to cost a lot of money, but they will also suggest, if you've got like big things that can be done, this could be where you do it. But just with the simple improvements and with their advice, you could save between £25 and £100 a year and not be too badly out of pocket. Every household will also be given a free NES energy information and advice pack once they've done their visit. So if you Google, or other search engines obviously apply, Northamptonshire Energy Saving Service, you can request a home visit via their website. Something that Kevin was saying earlier, so it's a shame that he's gone, is what government help is available. Well, the government has just launched their energy company obligation. It's the 4th version of that, which is why it's called Eco4, and it's worth £4 billion, and it delivers energy efficiency and heating measures to homes in Great Britain between April just gone and March 2026. It's aimed at households on the lowest incomes only, and in EPC energy efficiency bands D to G, sorry. So essentially, you'll notice that a lot of people that need it, like your housing association tenants, for instance, may get the support from this, but for people that aren't necessarily in those categories, there is currently no government sort of grants or anything available. But it's worth looking at to see what's available. And if you have a look on the government's website, there's a huge load of documents you can read through if that's your thing.
Just on this, Jonathan, did you pick up, because usually this sort of scheme is trying to help the people on the very lowest incomes, and often, many of those are not necessarily living in social housing, so they might be in private rented accommodation, or they might be homeowners now with a very limited income. So did you pick up any eligibility criteria for, what class does the lowest income? Or
I didn't actually, Marion. No, I should have done, and I do apologise for that. But like I say, the two sort of pillars, if you like, are the fact that they are on the lowest incomes. I can have a look for that as we go through the slides to answer that question at the end.
we can have a look anyway, and we'll dig out some information and maybe put it on the website afterwards to let people know. I mean, it's not always clear with this energy company obligation stuff how they're helping, but I'm hearing some positive things. It's just we'll need to get a bit more information about it. Val, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, if Yes, I have. I do quite a lot of networking, business networking. And I met a guy a couple of months ago who actually works for a company that they go around and talk to people that are on benefits in particular and low income families, and to see if they come into, was probably this, to see if they come into this situation, and they can actually sign them up through the landlords so that they can actually apply the energy saving stuff to properties that are rented. So
That's really good to know. Yeah.
I'll find out about that for you if you like.
Yeah, thank you very much, Val. If you do, also, if you do find anything, if you can sort of email to us. I'm just going to ask Greg as well from the council.
I've got the criteria if you want now, so I can just add that before Greg, if you like. Basically, you need to have income related and support allowance, ESA, or job seekers allowance, or another type of income support, pension credit guarantee. I might have got that around the wrong way. Pension credit guarantee credit, tax credits, or universal credit. So you have to be on a government benefit to apply.
What about PIP or DLA?
Doesn't mention PIP or DLA, but I would assume that, bearing in mind this looks like it's means tested, like the tax credits and the universal credits are like there are income requirements that you have to fulfill. You have to be below a certain income to get those to get this.
Okay, well, we'll have a look anyway. Thanks, Jonathan.
Okay.
Greg Haynes, are you aware of anything else that Northampton Council is doing to help people on low incomes that might want to upgrade their homes in any way?
I can find out for you. I haven't specifically found out anything for tonight.
Okay, so if you can let us know, and also Val was going to let us know, and then we'll put that in the notes and share that on the website with this presentation afterwards.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so thank you everybody for that. Thanks for finding out those criteria, Jonathan, as well.
Okay, fabulous. Okay, so we've also got a website. It's called Energy Savers, a bit like this presentation. If you go to energysavers.org.uk, it's got lots more information than I can fit into a presentation, and it's by Wellingborough Eco Group. It's in the same format as our website, and it's been supported by the Centre for Sustainable Energy. So there's loads of information on there for you about energy saving, about reducing your carbon footprint. There's a lot of information on there for you. There's also a Facebook group, facebook.com groups, Energy Savers, that's designed for people to sort of share stuff on. So for yourself, Val, potentially Greg, you can join that and share with everybody the stuff that you find. I
noticed that Karen's got a hand up. Have you got a question, Karen?
I've looked it up, that thing, and it doesn't apply to people that have got a disability unless they're on universal credit or something like that. So it doesn't include armed forces independent payment, attendance allowance, carers allowance, constant attendance allowance, disability leave allowance, industrial disablement benefit, personal independent payment, severe disablement allowance, or war pensions, mobility supplement. So anything to do with disability does not apply for that thing.
Unless you're on one of the ones that I said earlier, of course.
But unless you're on a really low income and can get benefit because of that. So yeah.
That's a shame, isn't it? Well,
it's a shame,
more than a shame actually, because obviously not everybody that's disabled is on income, ESA or universal credit.
Universal credit, yeah.
Mind you, a lot of pensioners will be on pensioner credit, and hopefully it will help them to do work on their homes. So
Absolutely. The other thing to say on that is that a lot of people that are on low incomes are in social housing. So a lot of housing associations are going through sort of their stock and upgrading their houses. As I said earlier, like where there was something on Look East probably about 3 months ago now, that they've done a whole street of their residents and they are finding the benefits that way. So it may be that possibly like people who aren't necessarily going to be looking for this could benefit anyway, which is good news.
I think one thing from all of this work we're going to do through these workshops and stuff, we're going to talk about a lot of different things that people can do to their homes, or that we can do as communities or whatever, about how we cut our carbon footprint and how we live more sustainably. But you know, there will be costs, and obviously the people that need to make those savings the most are often the people with the least funds to enable things to happen. So, you know, clearly there is some help available, but maybe we've got to look at other ways that communities are going to be able to help the people on the lowest incomes that don't fall into some of these narrow categories. And that's something to think about for the future.
It's perhaps something that we can share a lot more as well, Marion, as we can do bits via the Climate Action Project to sort of share this information with people. A lot of people on lower incomes potentially are on social media, and that might be a really good thing for them to find out. Obviously, yeah. We're on the last slide, people. So thank you very much for listening to me. Do join us again. I believe we're going to have a quick conversation after this, but I hope you found this presentation useful. But don't forget, this is just one of many. The last two, which was energy basics and energy use, are on YouTube for you, and on our website, which is wcap.org.uk/video. And next Thursday, same time, same place, we will look in much more detail on renewables to see what they can do for you. So I shall stop sharing. And if anybody's got any questions, we can see your lovely faces.
Thank you very much for that, Jonathan. That was very helpful. I think there's a lot for us still to learn, I think, and to share on this. Somebody did have a question earlier on about another question about the heat pumps. I'll just go back to, I think it was Gail was sharing something about heat pumps. If you're still with us, Gail. She was saying with a heat pump, does it fit into the existing central heating system? Do you have to have larger radiators? Having a new gas boiler now, can you prepare the system for future use of a heat pump? I mean, I can have a go. Do you want to have a go at answering this, Jonathan? Or
I think with heat pumps, it's a really interesting thing that if you've got a really well insulated house, they're an absolute boon, and it's definitely the right way to go because you're saving so much money, and obviously you're saving an absolute stack of carbon. But I think, as I said earlier, that if you've got a house that needs insulating, it needs insulating first, and if you've got a boiler that's working, it may well be worth waiting a year or two for technology to catch up a bit. These things have been around for, I don't know, sort of 10, 15 years. And our friends in Germany have installed an awful lot more than we have. But, I mean, in this country, like the installers, like your engineers don't necessarily recommend them because, like I say, housing stock in this country is pretty sort of drafty and not ideal for these systems. So if you've got a draft-proofed, well-insulated house, go for it. As Judy said earlier, there are issues, like if you've got it outside your bedroom window, it may not be the best thing to have in the world, a bit like air conditioning. So it's all about sort of getting the right system for you, but the caveat with that is that you're going to have it in the end, or an electrical heating system based on your system at the moment. So it's definitely the way to go.
Just on the heat pumps, I mean, I can have a go at trying to answer this question, but next week, as well as a gentleman called Simon Turner joining us, as a friend of mine that's been installing renewable heating systems for many years now, She's going to come and join us, and she'll be able to talk to us a bit about, for starters, her solar system, but also about her renewable, about her experience of installing renewable heating systems, particularly heat pumps and other things. When it comes, going back to the question about how does a heat pump sit with your existing radiators, etc. The idea with a heat pump system is that you're drawing the heat out of the air or out of the earth, out from under the earth, or from water, the warmth from water outside, and then it's warmed up slightly by a little motor, and then that is passed through coil systems or whatever within your home. Some people
depends, Marion. Sorry to interrupt. That depends on what system you get. You can get ground sourced heat pumps, but generally, like heat pumps are air sourced, which is the vibrating ones. Depends what's best for you. Do you know what I mean? A ground sourced heat pump generally is a lot more of an expensive thing to do, but it could work better for you.
Yeah, but whichever way the system, as Jonathan talked about, the reverse refrigeration thing, whichever way that is heated, whether it's by water, earth or air, the heat has to be exchanged throughout the property. And one of the challenges with our central heating systems is that they become smaller radiators, smaller units. The idea with a heat pump is that the heat moves around the house, and there's enough, what's the phrase? There's enough, what's it called?
Surface area, maybe?
That's it. There's enough surface area to dispense the heat as it moves around, because it goes around the house. It's supposed to dispense heat around the house, and then when it comes back to the pump, it's supposed to be cooler, so that the heat pump warms it up again and sends it around again. But when you're trying to attach this system to an existing central heating radiator system, where the radiators are quite small and the surface area is smaller, and it's got, if you think about the radiators surface area from when we were, go back 20, 30 years, and compare radiators now to what they were 20 or 30 years ago, they're a lot smaller, a lot slimmer, and a lot less surface area. Whereas the idea with heat pumps is to have a good surface area in the property, so it allows the warmth from the material as it's pumped around the house to be released. And so it's kind of opposite. There you are. Well,
does that help?
I don't know. But it's kind of opposite to what we've been doing with our central heating systems run by gas or oil. They've been making the surface area smaller, whereas for a heat pump you need the surface area to be bigger. So there's a bit of a problem with that, but I'm not an expert on this, and we have an expert coming next week. So, and you might want to ask that question again, Gail. So that's my my minimal attempt at
what we're trying to say.
Thank you very much.
Next week. Yeah.
Sorry.
Can I say something? I say something? I was watching a program on them the other day, and they were saying that you couldn't really put it to your existing radiator system because the pipes, for a start, are far too narrow, and the radiator would have to be a lot bigger. So that's one thing. And also they were saying that you should have an underwater, to make it viable, you have to have an underfloor heating system. That's the only way to really do it, because the expanse that you need it all under the floor. So that's what I heard anyway.
Yeah, so that
there's a lot of myths, isn't there? I think that's
Oh my goodness.
over again. There are a lot of myths. I think like that picture basically showed sort of a coil system heating up some water which could possibly be pumped around your house, just like your current boiler does. So the answer is I don't know. We do need somebody like Marion's friend from Wales who's going to tell us all about it and basically sort of try and squash some of these myths.
Yeah, so Darlene will be coming and explaining it all to us next week. Karen, did you want to ask another question, or was that to say what you just said a minute ago?
I think Greg's also got his hand up.
It was to say what I said before, but it was on a program and they did seem to know what they were saying. So I'm just saying.
Yeah. And Greg, you've got your hand up.
Yeah. Can you hear me? I'm not sure.
Yes.
To simplify the issue with the heat pumps, a gas boiler typically heats the water that gets circulated around the radiators as we have them, something like 55 to 65 degrees. But a heat pump will heat to about 40, 45 degrees. So there's just less heat energy in that water that's being pumped around. That's why you need a bigger surface area. Heat pumps work best with underfloor heating, as was said. If you're going to run them through radiators, you're going to need a bigger area because the water just isn't as hot. If you have a reasonably modern gas boiler, it's summer now, so you can't really do this, but if you have a reasonably modern gas boiler, you can set the temperature for the heating circuit, turn it down to 45 degrees and see if it heats your house. If it does, then a heat pump will probably work. If you're freezing, then you know that the heat pump is not going to work with your current radiators. So you can test it next winter, as long as you're not investing before next winter, and just see if it's viable. But as Jonathan said, the thing is to reduce the load on the system, and you reduce the load on the system by insulating and reducing infiltration by draught-proofing. That should be your first step. Question of whether you can actually install underfloor heating really depends on how your house is built. If you have suspended timber floor, like it sounds like Marion has, that's possible. If you have a great big concrete slab on the ground, as I have, you're just left with a very cold, great big slab of concrete on the ground. And the only way you could resolve that, and I have to say a lot of Victorian houses have this, they have suspended timber floors at the front of the house, and they have a great slab of concrete at the back of the house. The only way you could do it was to put insulation on top of that slab, and then the underfloor heating pipes, and then some surface on top of that. And you're losing, you know, I don't know, 150 mil, 200 mil of ceiling height by doing that. So underfloor heating is a good solution where you can make it work. But I think the government has overhyped it. And in terms of electricity systems, electricity-based systems, there's one system which Jonathan didn't mention. If you have a well-insulated, well-draft-proofed house, another alternative is mechanical ventilation with heat recovery, which people in the business will usually just call MVHR. And that circulates warm air around the house. But again, it's about the same cost to install as a heat pump, and you're talking £10,000 for a typical family home.
I thought, Greg, that was old tech and that wasn't really being done anymore. It was quite a big thing,
no,
sort of 70s and 80s, wasn't it?
For all the passive house freaks out there, it's absolutely central to passive house. So no, MVHR has definitely been around for a long time, but it is an exceptionally simple technology, no gas being compressed and released and all that kind of stuff. But it does require you to run ventilating ducts around the house, and installing all that is labor intensive and so costs money. But it is an electricity-based system, which is an alternative to heat pumps if you can't make heat pumps work.
So what was that? What does MVHR stand for again?
Mechanical ventilation with heat recovery. And I should also point out, according to the building regulations, if you make your house so draft-proofed that you don't get a sufficient air change rate, you're going to have to stick mechanical ventilation into the house anyway. So you might as well do it with heat recovery.
Okay, so would you be able to talk to us about that another time? Because I'm sure I've done a lot of reading in the last few months, and I think I read up something about this, and I've probably forgotten what it is now, but I thought there was a couple of ways of doing that, aren't there? And well, there's different systems depending on the sort of home that you have. But I mean, as you read up about these things, or as I read up about these things, they're quite a bit mind-blowing, really, all the different options that there are.
The advantage of MVHR is that it is extremely simple. I mean, basically, as you ventilate warm air out of the house, you transfer the heat into the cold air that you're drawing into the house. And it does that quite efficiently, about 90% efficient. And that's all it is. It's a fan, basically. And
That's
fans
very-
are pretty straightforward.
As you said, it's got a really old system, and it was something that you used to have in quite a few modern houses sort of 20, 30 years ago, or longer before that, possibly. But without the recovery, I guess.
Yeah, you can
new
even
bit.
get what are called single room heat recovery. So if you've got a bathroom fan to ventilate the bathroom, you can actually replace it with a single room heat recovery system. And that will, so the nice warm air that you've generated from your bath or your shower or whatever, you can actually reclaim that without the moisture by heating the cool air that's being dragged in to ventilate the bathroom. So it's got a lot of advantages, but you have to have a very well draft-proofed house for it to work. Otherwise, you're just mixing air through the MVHR with cold air that's leaking through your doors and your windows and the cracks in your walls and all that kind of stuff.
So really, for all of this, whatever heating system we're using, whether it's a renewable system or even a gas or an oil-fired system, which I wouldn't recommend because obviously we want to phase them out. But whichever, we've got to really tackle the insulation issues that we've got in our homes.
Yeah, insulation and draft proofing.
Yeah. But it's good to know that whilst we're doing that, if we also thought, because I mean, obviously Jonathan talked earlier about insulating solid walls. We've got solid walls in our home. But if you're doing all that sort of work, you know, whether it's in your loft or under your floorboards or on the walls, back, front, wherever, and it's going to be a lot of disruption to your home anyway, it's a good idea, if you can't use a heat pump system, to actually look at something like this mechanical ventilation with heat recovery. Because you know that, as you said, requires lots of different ducting things to be put around the house.
Yeah.
And if it's done all at the same time, then A, there's less disruption, and B, hopefully it'll be more affordable for people anyway if it's quite straightforward. And I remember reading up about it, and it was, you know, but it's just getting to understand all of these things and how we can make sense. And clearly some ideas are being pushed more than others. It sounds like maybe the cost of this would be more about the different piping you'd have to put around your house.
Yeah, it's the installation cost. The actual box, the heat exchanger, they're about the same cost as a boiler, as far as I know. But it's just very labor intensive to do it.
And the disruption, of course, it's just going to cause.
Yep.
Is that something that, I know we're getting towards, in fact, we're at the end of our time, but is that something that we can sort of revisit in our sustainable homes and business premises workshop on the 28th of July?
Yeah,
that's probably where that could come in, because it's almost like you're building the house from scratch, aren't you? Sort of, you're not, but do you know what I mean? You're doing a lot of work, remedial work, so everything's got to change, if you like. Has anybody else got any other questions or comments they would like to add? Have we stunned you all into silence?
I just want to say thank you very much. It's really, really interesting. Thank you, Marion. Thank you, Jonathan.
One thing I wanted to ask people, obviously Jonathan was going through different sorts of insulation options, etc. It'd be good to know, you know, we're not always sure where we're pitching what you need to know. You know, for some people, what we're sharing might be, well, that's common sense, you know, that I know all that already. For others, it might be, oh, that's new to me. And you know, the whole thing about insulation, or about what Greg was just describing. I mean, we're going to come on to the renewable energy generation and renewable heating next week. But in terms of insulation, do people want to know more about different insulation opportunities or methods, or do you think you've got enough to be able to go and do your own research? Because we're just trying to work out where to pitch our presentations.
Can I just kick in? There is a lot of people are going to do this DIY to cut out the labor costs, and labor costs are hugely more expensive than the material costs. There are things you need to pay attention to if you're going to do it DIY. Some of them have already been raised. The need for ventilation, so that the fabric of the building doesn't rot. You need to make sure that timber is still ventilated. Continuity of the insulation. For instance, if you're putting insulation in the roof and you're putting insulation in the walls, does that insulation actually meet up, or is there a gap between the roof insulation and the wall insulation? If you're putting insulation around the outside of the house, what happens at the window reveals? Things like that you need to be cautious of, because if you get cold spots in an otherwise well insulated wall or roof, you're going to get condensation. And because the air is nice and warm, it can hold a lot of moisture, it hits a cold surface, you get condensation, you're going to get mildew and possibly mold. So if you're doing it yourself, there's more that you need to know than has come across today.
Can I quickly respond to that point? Because we had our bathroom done and we had an insulation put in our bathroom to stop that. So an extra layer put between the wall, because it's a single walled house. So and it's really worked. Do you know what I mean? Because you're right, you've stopped the coldness of the walls doing that. But also with my house and probably quite a few others, we've got the sloping roofs that come into the rooms. Do you know what I mean? So for instance, you'd have to do an internal type insulation on those. You couldn't put anything else really, because otherwise you're insulating the roof, or certainly can't put felt down there. So there are lots of sort of individual challenges. I think Judy's going to ask a question or inform us a little bit more.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, you were saying sometimes you have like loft insulation, but maybe not enough, or perhaps it's got compacted or something and you need more. Would you necessarily, would it be best to use the same as you've already got to top it up, or is it actually an advantage to use another sort, in addition? Or doesn't it matter?
I think in the presentation I did talk about the difference between rock wool and the glass sort of stuff that most people have got. The main difference between that, and I put it fairly basically, is one's less squidgy than the other. And that's important if you're putting it between sort of floorboards, or it's potentially going to get squashed. It still keeps the air in there. If you sit on some glass fibre or whatever it is, you're squashing all the air and it's pretty pointless. Whereas you need something a bit more robust or solid, like Marion's put under a floorboard. So it's a good point.
Say, for example, I think that we've got the loose stuff in ours. Would it be an advantage to put, say, a solid layer on top of that, perhaps?
Do you know, Greg?
It depends what is meant by the loose stuff. The more insulation. I mean, those boards that Jonathan referred to, Grenfell aside, they tend to be more efficient insulators than almost anything else you can get. So with the exception of aerogel, well, aerogel's a board. If you're topping up your insulation, then those boards are more effective than rock wool or or fiberglass or whatever per inch of thickness, if you like. But you could just put lots and lots and lots of rock wool or other insulating bats as well. Depends how much space you've got.
Right.
I mean,
Obviously
my roof is inaccessible. It's the only way you actually get access to it is ripping down the ceiling. So I, I can't get any insulation in my roof. So yeah, it depends. It depends on particular circumstances, but in general, those boards are more highly efficient than the loose stuff.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Essentially, Judy, those boards are what they use for internal internal insulation, and they just sort of put plasterboard over the top. So if you
So
put,
I was going to say, so if you wanted to, I mean, like we do, and a lot of people do, I think, use the loft for storage, then, you know, you'd need to have like the hard boards down to put stuff on top of.
yeah, because otherwise you're going to squash it. And actually, MDF sort of boards or wood boards are fantastic insulators as well, as long as they don't squash all the air out of the fluffy stuff underneath.
Right.
But
Okay.
a foot, you're talking a foot of stuff that is recommended to put down, or just under a foot, 27 centimeters. So that's quite a lot, and a lot of people raise the floor level and then put floorboards on top of that. Depends how much room you've got.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, there's some good advice about how to put, you know, a proper floor in your loft. Anyway, I mean, we've done some in our loft, but you know, there are some ideas, but you know, there's some good advice. I've looked at a number of films on YouTube, which have been very helpful. But I think you know, because we have a similar challenge in that I think we had in our loft there was the rock wool stuff, which is very thin. Then a few years ago, that kind of paper spray stuff was sprayed everywhere, across everything, and I've no idea about how thermally insulating it is. And you know, and apart from the fact that trying to put the floor up there is not easy because it's hidden everything. You know, you have to go hunting for the joists. But
perhaps you need to give Ness a call or register for one of their free visits on their website. If it's free, you might as well, mightn't you?
Yeah, because some people, if you've got a very old house, you could have lots of different layers of insulation in your loft, especially because I think a lot of people will have done what you just said, Judy, is putting stuff on top of what they've already got. But how do we know if that's making any difference apart from when it snows, which it doesn't do much these days? And you know, you might see whether snow stays on the roof or not, but that's a bit of a, you know, it's not a great way of assessing how effective it's been.
We don't get much snow anymore anyway.
Exactly, you know, you might have to wait 10 years for it to snow again. But anyway,
we are over time, Marion. I'm sure people want to.
My question to people was and is, would you like to have maybe another session about lots of different insulation options and ways of insulating, or basically go into more detail on this, or have you had enough about insulation? It's just that it's such a crucial thing for everything, and since, as Jonathan rightly reported at the beginning, so many properties have lots of work to do to be even half effective in terms of insulation. I think it's something that, you know, maybe many of us need to learn more about. What do you think?
Everybody into silence. But if it was me, I'd have a practical one where you've got samples of all of them, and where people can actually come and sort of touchy-feely and discuss what the best option is.
Yeah, we might. It'd be good if we could invite someone to come and talk about different sorts of insulation options and how you might go about doing them. But I think there's always, when it comes on to the DIY options, there's always challenges because everybody's home is different. But you know, I think this is something going forward that all of us are going to have to crack one way or another. So anyway, just to wind up then, thank you very much to Jonathan for his presentation and to everybody for your questions. As Jonathan rightly said, we've got another session next Thursday, and that will be about renewable. We're going to do a bit of a run through about renewable power options but also spend a good bit of time talking about renewable heating. And as Darlene has been installing lots of renewable heating systems for years, it's a really good chance to ask her some of these practical questions, and she may well also be able to answer some questions about different insulation options alongside it. She's also looking herself at, you know, when you generate power, is there a way of storing that power rather than either giving it to the national grid or just it being dissipated. So she might be talking to us a bit about energy storage as well. Simon will be telling us about his solar power system and the approach that he's got with his supplier. But anyway, that's all for next week. The presentation tonight, the recording, when we're finished, Jonathan will be working on that, and then we'll be putting that on the website again, as Jonathan mentioned. And if you want,
tomorrow.
That's right. And if you've missed any of the talks which we've done so far, whether it's the climate conversations or the 2 other workshop sessions, there's recordings of those on the website, and the slides are also on the website. And the website address is wcap.org.uk. So please have a good womble on there. We're also
one thing about these slides, Marion, is that they're currently as Excel spreadsheets, and it doesn't really work properly. So I'm going to record them as videos, and again have them as just slides going through as a video, so you can read them. It'll be a lot less of a lengthy presentation for people to go through. So it will take minutes rather than a couple of hours. I think that will go on there sort of in the next few days.
Yeah, I think you meant PowerPoint presentation rather than an Excel spreadsheet.
Oh, did I? Oh, okay. Well, you know what I mean.
Yeah, so anyway, thank you to everybody for coming. And we look forward to seeing you next week. And please tell your friends, and because we just want to share the ideas and learn together. There's a lot to learn, and you know, and if you can't join us next week, then there will be a recording of the talk, and hopefully you can pick up stuff there. Are there any other questions or anything anybody wants to say before we finish? No, right.
Somebody's gone. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah,
John.
hopefully see you all next week. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.